Welcome back, everybody. Today I have a quick guide on Last Piece Karin in case if you haven't already built her or haven't seen the buff that was kind of addressed and given to her. Let's get into it. First and foremost, as you can see, Last Piece Karin is a speed DPS, and if we take a look at her kit, as I always forget to do, of going to her page kind of early, she does have really good base stats. Now, not only is her rating good, which I misclicked, apologies, but her Awakening gives her 126 base speed, 1029 attack, and she also has an additional 8 crit chance built into her kit, as opposed to other DPSs. Her S3 has a lot of text, so long story short is that you press S3, it's a non-attack skill. It makes it so that you ignore damage reduction and damage sharing effects, and when you beat up the enemy, long story short, you need to press S3 before you press S2. It gives you more damage. It lets you ignore Aureus and Adamant Shield and stuff like that now, as opposed to before, which it used to just be you ignore any Aureus or tank damage sharing effects. Now it's also damage mitigating effects. With the skill 2 here, as you can see, Phantom Strike says that not only do you deal a big AO or a big single target nuke that also has 50% increased hit chance, it also puts you into stealth and also gives you a barrier at the exact same time, which is really nice. It scales with speed, it scales with attack, it's a hard-hitting nuke. Last Piece Karin's S1 now has been buffed so that her change has I believe it's I want to say it's 15% combat readiness pushback, which is really nice. 15% combat readiness pushback is nothing to scoff at. But long story short, it's kind of a damage dealing S1 anyways. The pushback is nice, but who knows? I'm not really sure if you'd really need the pushback. It'll probably help in some certain situations, maybe in a vacuum. Haha, no pun intended. Anyways, moving along. Let's talk about the buff to Last Piece Karin, because again, formerly, she kind of did everything that she did right now. There isn't that much of a change. The only big major change is that, number one, she now ignores Adamant, or she kind of pierces through things like Proof of Valor, which is helpful, but there's already Shalltear that came out. There's characters like Death Dealer Ray. There's characters like Karin to deal with evasion characters. So how good are the changes? And despite all the nonsense and rambling I just said, it's actually really good to ignore Adamant and Aureus on one skill. Again, the 15% pushback I think is maybe the icing on the cake. It does kind of let you have some impact on your S1 in your downturns where you don't have S3 into S2. But let's talk about the game plan when it comes to Last Piece Karin. Now, you guys are probably all familiar with her game plan already, which is, okay, press S3, and so long as there isn't a Moon Bunny or a non-attack skill Punisher, you should be able to one-shot any of the evasion characters, and that's absolutely true. Now, the difference between Last Piece Karin, in my opinion, as opposed to other characters, like if I was trying to do an analysis of a character like Shalltear, is that Last Piece Karin does boast a really, really hard-hitting S1 if you soul burn it, and a really, really nice S2 as well, assuming that you are able to, again, one-shot something. And again, now, compared to Shalltear doesn't get a barrier or anything like that when she goes into stealth, which can sometimes matter, sometimes not matter, depending on what you're getting AoE'd by if someone's trying to knock you out of stealth. But I do think that, unlike Shalltear, Last Piece Karin now has an added benefit of being able to be picked into characters that you think might have some sort of adamant cheese. It also kind of just presents her to be a bit more powerful in terms of dealing damage, even if someone decided to cheese and put like Proof of Valor on their Aiden. Now, to be clear, Shalltear does boast a 100% hit chance as opposed to Last Piece Karin's, but that's not the point. Her game plan is to one-shot the evasion characters, but now with her buff, you may be able to just pick her because you see evasion and you don't have to worry about whether or not something else can kind of mitigate or, cheese you. You kind of just rip through it, you tear through it, and you one-shot it, regardless of what's going on. Now, in terms of her imprints, which we should go into right now, I do want to make mention of something really quick, and that's that although her imprint is really, really impactful because it gives 15% crit chance, and of course the team-wide 15% or team-wide 8% is also nice, but you're not going to really care about that because you, of course, want the crit chance for Last Piece Karin. She is a 4-star, so at least in terms of receiving copies of her, you can already get a copy of Blue Karin, who you can then use to imprint Last Piece Karin from a side story unlockable event that you can buy with the keys, the time keys, which if you aren't familiar with where they are, it's like a side story book of memories right here that you see down here on the side. That being said, though, What I do want to address about the imprints is that it's really important for her because it's number 1, crit chance, and number 2, she's a speed DPS, but number 3, because an artifact that a lot of people like pairing with her is Manica of Control, so that you get the additional hit chance and the crit chance from the artifact, which is pretty good value. But there is kind of an elephant in the room before we go past imprints and before we go past the game plan, the buffs and all that. And that's that actually Last Piece Karin, I don't want to say is bugged right now, but I'm not really exactly sure what's going on with her. Now, if you recall, when I was explaining through the kit, I read the S2, or I read through the S3 that says, when attacking, if the target is a hero, you ignore damage reduction and damage sharing effects and increases damage dealt proportional to the target's max health, dispelled after attacking. Now, if you guys are familiar, damage reducing effects usually indicate something like adamant, right? And damage sharing effects usually implicate something like an Aureus or an escort. However, and I'll show this in a little bit as well, Last Piece Karin is actually now able to one-shot characters like Tempest Surin, characters like Roy, Sylvan Sage. She has a pseudo fixed damage kind of hit in a sense. Not that she literally does fixed damage, but rather that she has the ability to ignore through any of the typical survivability techniques that some of these characters have. Spirit Eye Celine, where she's unable to receive 51% damage, is just pierced by Last Piece Karin. And as far as I could tell, this was not something that people were aware of. Now, again, even if it had just been the Adamant and Aureus kind of ignore from her skill 3, I think she would be really good. But this opens up a whole slew of gameplay. Excuse me. This opens up a whole realm of possibilities for Last Piece Karin, because now you can pick this not only into Aiden, but if someone tries to counter you with something like Tempest Surin or Spirit Eye Celine, just ignore them because you could one-shot it anyways. Now, again, to be clear, this is really, really impactful and nothing to kind of scoff at, and I'm kind of waiting on Smilegate to see if this is just intended or not, but it is worth noting that in terms of it being a credible thing and not just a bug, they did recently, or I don't think this frostbite description was always what it used to be. I believe this text has been changed, where now it says that formerly frostbite basically does what Last Piece Karin's S3 does, which it says cannot be subject to any damage reduction or damage sharing effects. But there's an additional line. I swear this line was not in here. Maybe I'm just forgetting, but it says does not affect damage suffered amount limit effects. And of course that it only affects heroes. Now, I don't quite recall that being there. I haven't done a Shepherd Jenna video in a long, long time, so maybe I'm just forgetting. But I think it is really, really, really crazy that, again, she kind of can one-shot all of the fixed damage characters. Formerly, you would literally have to pick someone like Karina, Rimuru, Kawa, like whatever the characters, you'd have to burn or like you do a debuff against someone in order to bypass some of these characters. But now Last Piece Karin could just do that with her S3, which makes her even more powerful, assuming it's not a bug and it's an intended feature. Whichever it is, that's totally fine. I just was not aware of this prior to this. Moving along though, we have her sets, and this is unfortunately kind of as clean cut and as straightforward as it can get, which is a blessing and a curse. A blessing because you know exactly what you're looking for. You definitely want penetration set, you definitely want speed set, and you want all the damage in the world while avoiding things like HP defense if you can. Of course, I can't because this is the best gear that I had for Last Piece Karin. But in terms of if you wanted to do something kind of funny, I don't think she really works that well with something like counter. Arguably, you could maybe use something like Destruction if you could get up to like 250 speed, but I think that's really, really tough and kind of not worth it, especially because you want to be faster than characters like Mediator Cowrick or Laya or whatever the character is that you're trying to outspeed, so that you can't get punched and just instantly die. But in terms of her artifact, I think there are two that really stand out. The first, in my opinion, is going to be Manica of Control because it synergizes so well with her. She gains additional crit chance, she has additional hit chance as well on single attacks, and she has a single target DPS anyway, so it doesn't really matter. The other artifact that you could run on her that I think I've seen a decent amount of people run is either Wind Rider, which is very greedy. Let's not do that because she already has stealth, but I understand because you may want to go back into stealth. And then it's Symbol of Unity. Symbol of Unity does a little bit more damage than the Manica of Control. However, it does kind of take up your slot as an artifact. If you want to pick or put Symbol of Unity on someone else, I don't know who you would put it on, whether that's, I don't know, someone like Zahak or another character, I don't know, even Shalltear maybe. You can't basically get rid of the Symbol of Unity from your LPK, but unlike some of the other classes where you'd have to get something like Arunka's artifact, who no one has ever pulled in their entire life, if you randomly have Sez's artifact, or I guess you could make the argument go both ways, you do have access to Manica of Control, and it just feels so synergistic, specifically with Last Piece Karin. It gives her decent damage because, of course, it's 15% additional stat, which is, you could do the conversion of that, but also because, it gives you hit chance on every single one of her hits, and it's unconditional. By comparison, if you take a look at someone like Zahak, my Zahak is not very well built right now because Zahak is literally the most worthless character in the game. Sorry, nameless. You do have access to another hit chance artifact, but it's in the form of sort of Autumn Eclipse, which does increase the attack of all allies, but 5% attack to your entire team as opposed to 15% crit chance. You can kind of see why Manica of Control is a little bit more impactful. That being said, though, if we move back to Last Piece Karin, I do think that you could also, of course, use any damage artifact that you want, assuming that you have them. Last Piece Karin, although she does want hit chance, does already boast a 50% hit chance on her S2, so if that's not in your interest, or if you want to focus on something else, or want more damage, you could definitely get away with that. But as we move out of the artifact section, we can talk about the PvP and PvE sections. Now, again, to be clear, this is a character that is a Moonlight 4-star, and for all intents and purposes, looks like she was designed specifically for PvP. Read some of her skills, right? It only affects against, it only affects non-boss mobs, right? Or which one is it? Isn't there one of these that affects? Yeah, if the target is a hero, ignores damage reduction and damage sharing effects. Like, they already kind of built into her kit that she was not really supposed to be used for PvE. Otherwise, of course, like, her S3 could have like a bit more application to be a little bit stronger. But since that's the case, I think trying to use her in PvE is kind of a cope. It doesn't really make too much sense. But for PvP, Guild War and Arena, she is terrific. If you are fighting against someone that decides to kind of cringe you out and they just want to pick Fat Cat plus a bunch of, anti-hitting, aka evasion characters, then all you need to do is take your Last Piece Karin, and now even if the Fat Cat is on Adamant, or or if it has not Adamant, if it has Proof of Valor, and even if there is an Adamant on the team for whatever for whatever reason, like Arrowwell or something, you can kind of just blitz through it. Last Piece Karin does an insane amount of damage, and her damage multis are really high. I have mine at 277 speed, to be clear, but I don't really think that you need it to be super fast anyways. Speaking on that note, by the way, I don't think I mentioned my personal build, which I'll go into right now. I have mine at 3.3k attack, 291 C damage, with 85 crit chance because, of course, I do have Manica of Control. You can laugh at my 0.3% when I miss or end up getting one shot. Again, 277 speed is really nice, but I'd like to be 280, maybe 285, but I can't really afford that right now while also wanting damage, so that's what I have currently. That being said, though, guys, if you take a look at the different characters that could be good or bad alongside her, you'd already know that she's great for PvP. So before we get into the synergies and counter section, let me just preface and make the disclaimer that she is definitely really good for PvP, and I already mentioned how strong she is in Guild War and Arena, but if you are going to be taking her into RTA, I definitely think that with the way that third picking is right now, if you're going to be doing mocks, or even if you see her in the draft mode, she is really strong, just because she is a stealth target that can't be knocked out unless if you have like a really strong AoE. But if you're fighting characters that have evasion, usually those characters don't have AoE or you can avoid them, i.e. Aiden, so long as you don't hit her, kind of just gets one shot by Last Piece Karin. You could say the same thing for Violet. You could say the same thing for Fat Cat, which is kind of when you're supposed to be using Last Piece Karin anyways. But again, even if you don't want to use it exclusively for fighting against evasion characters, she still does a lot of damage nonetheless. She's 280 speed or 270 or faster in some cases, and so long as you can outspeed, I don't see why you wouldn't just pick Last Piece Karin if you want to just nuke someone or one-shot someone. It's kind of like picking Rand sometimes. Like, if they aren't respecting your speed or if they aren't respecting a damage threat, go ahead, take it, one-shot the character that you think you are going to one-shot, and then be on with it. That being said, though, as we move on into the Synergies and Counters section, there is kind of a big elephant in the room. Now, of course, I just mentioned how she has some more strengths compared to a character like Shalltear, but you also have to remember that she herself also has flaws, because, again, she has a non-attack skill on skill 3. Now, with Celine's buff, with the popularity of Fire Politics currently, that does bode pretty poorly for Last Piece Karin. If you do want the ignore Aureus or the ignore damage share, and if you want to one-shot a character like T-Cern or Spirit Eye Celine, you do need Neo Phantom Sword or Phantom Sword, whichever it is. Which does mean that you have to use skill 3, and in that case, that means that if you are going to be running something like, I don't know, like a team composition to one-shot every single character or one-shot each individual, evasion character, if there's a Moon Bunny, if there's a Politis or a Celine, you kind of have to wait, or you're going to have to raw S2, which is even worse, because if the Aiden is tanky enough, if the Tempest Surin, I mean, I don't know why you would S2 a Tempest Surin if you couldn't one-shot it, but any scenario sounds kind of bad if you aren't able to use skill 3, so keep that in mind as a big counter to her. But in terms of synergies, I think she's actually stronger because she doesn't have that many synergies. Now, to be clear, of course, if you give her someone like Conqueror Lilius or Sea Phantom Politis as your kind of buff-ups to give yourself additional damage or to give yourself an additional S1 so you can proc something like Wind Rider if you're running that on her, of course, she's going to do a lot of damage, and you appreciate these sort of things, especially because Last Piece Karin is fast, and giving her rage and, the speed and attack to give her additional damage scaling, in addition to cycling, because you're also slowing down the team while also giving yourself speed buff. It is worth noting that, again, part of her strength is that she's a reactive pick. Like, they decide to pick evasion characters, and here's your character to now punish them for it. She's fast, and most of the evasion characters are slow, so she's self-reliant, or she's unreliant on other characters, and she is self-sufficient, is what I meant to say, which makes her quite valuable, especially if you have her already. Now, that does kind of bring us to the, is she a must-pull kind of character? And the answer is there's no way for you to even must-pull or pull this character outside of just getting something like lucky from like a free covenant or just using your galaxy bookmarks. But I know that a lot of you guys have seen ML Senya, the Bride Senya, which looks really, really waifu. And that's probably going to be a character that you hope that you maybe use your galaxy bookmarks on and you get her. And while you're pulling for it, you maybe get Last Piece Karin. But in that case, and for all intents and purposes, though she is really good, this conversation can't even be had. Must pull does not exist. She is not a must pull because how would you even get her? If you're on the topic of whether or not you should use your galaxy pulls right now to try and get her, that is ridiculous because there's no way to guarantee that you even get Last Piece Karin. But yeah, in terms of must pulling, if she's strong or not, she's of course very strong. I think borderline stronger actually than a character like Shalltear in their specific niche, because Shalltear is a 1-for-1 and that's fine. When they're, I guess picking non-attack characters. But in Last Piece Karin's evasion niche, where there isn't a Politis, there isn't a Celine, there isn't a Moon Bunny, Last Piece Karin does really well, but also doesn't really have any of the downsides that Shalltear has, where Shalltear's S1 is extremely, extremely underwhelming. Last Piece Karin's S1 now pushes back, and it hits like a truck. It really does. If you guys don't believe me, you can see for yourself. I am going to do one arena match. I'm going to try and see if I can find an evasion team to kind of just one-shot things. I don't know if I can find a team with Aiden. I don't have any like footage right now to kind of showcase things off. Unfortunately, because that's just how the cookie crumbles, and my queues are 3 minutes right now. So I'm going to devise a team right now. I'm going to use Last Piece Karin. And this looks like the exact team that I would use to try and punish basically a team that has Celine on it. I, again, literally just have no idea how Last Piece Karin has this ignore damage. It doesn't even sound like, I'm like a little baffled, to be honest, because I didn't even realize that Last Piece Karin did this, and it sounds more like an emergency buff, or it sounds like more of an emergency addition than like an intended change for them to make her be able to one-shot or have fixed damage capabilities similar to Rimuru. But okay, I mean, you see it, you love it, you see it. I mean, so long as I put everyone to sleep, we should be fine. Again, I'm using Zio, and wow, this is probably a really high ER Amelia, which is probably going to be bad. But I do have Blood Moon Haste, by the way. That character is ridiculous. Never mind. This is a really bad this is a really bad Amelia. But here we go. So I'm going to use Neo Phantom Blade, or I'm going to use Phantom Sword, which turns into Neo Phantom Blade, whatever the case is. And then look, as you can see, there's no mitigation, there's no randomness of, or, you know, it's just S2. Bam, she's dead. I don't even really know what to say here, because it really does not seem like that's how they intended the character to be played, if I'm being real. I don't really understand how they are going to get out of justifying this one, because it really does not seem like the sort of thing that they intended to have in the game. Like, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the damage cut thing, because she's just a DPS. This is kind of like if they gave Ludwig the capability to, you know, strip, or sorry, like, you know, bust through damage sharing effects like that, or damage mitigating effects like that. Because that was kind of like the last defense, actually, for those characters. Now, I apologize, because I am going to have to 50-50, and if I end up losing here, it's going to look bad. But, okay, perfect. I actually didn't end up dying here. I Soulburn won, which is okay, and Blood Moon Haste is so broken, honestly, guys, so, like, it doesn't even matter what I do here. I am on Water's Origin, by the way, for him now, but, I mean, Last Piece Karin, I mean, Blood Moon Haste, this is an absolutely ridiculous balance patch that they've shown off, guys, if I'm just being blunt. They could not have maybe made more impactful changes to characters ever. And whether or not every single character deserved it, like, you can maybe argue that someone deserves it a little bit more than Celine, but I would argue that Celine needed a little bit of love. Last Piece Karin likely also didn't need this change, though I do appreciate that she was touched up a little bit. I think the change that she does have now in being effective against characters like Tempest Cern, Spirit Eye Celine, and any other, you know, cannot be dropped below 51% health characters is really nice for Last Piece Karin, but I don't even think she necessarily needed it, because, again, the Adam and Orius change, kind of almost good enough to make her a solid, stable, neutral DPS. In any case, though, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. I just wanted to show off a bit of the highlights, the strengths, the weaknesses of the character. I apologize, because I'm trying to find footage for some of these characters, but no one is allowing me to play Last Piece Karin, because the queues don't go up, and also, who would let Last Piece Karin through when she's a reactive pick to evasion characters? Anyways, thanks again for watching, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. Thank you for all the love on the second channel. Hope you guys enjoyed. This is going to be all the people talk. This is probably going to be the second video that you guys see of the day. So I hope you guys learn something about Last Piece Karin, but she's ridiculous. I don't know if this is a bug or not. We'll find out. Anyways, that's gonna be it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Check out the rest of my socials. Cool. Love you guys. Have a good one. Good night. Good afternoon. Wherever you are. Check out my main channel and both my alt and main channel. If you're watching this, you're probably on my alt channel though. Bye bye.